Next, we have introduction of new business. I'm going to ask that the new business matters be taken as a block.
Motion to take them as a block?
Second.
Any discussion? There being none, clerk, please take the roll.
Councilman Ferry,
Yes.
Councilwoman Renzulli,
Yes.
Councilwoman Horoyan,
Yes.
Councilman Donegan,
Yes.
Councilman Campiano,
Yes.
Councilman Paplaskas,
Yes.
Councilman Wall,
Yes.
Councilman Marino.
Yes. Next, I'll entertain a motion to take the block and move these matters to their respective committees.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? There being none, clerk, please take the roll.
Councilman Ferry,
Yes.
Councilwoman Renzulli,
Yes.
Councilwoman Horoyan,
Yes.
Councilman Donegan,
Yes.
Councilman Campiano,
Yes.
Councilman Paplaskas.
Yes.
Councilman Wall,
Yes.
Council President Marino.
Yes.
My name is Pat Ford. I'm here acting in my capacity as Executive Director of Libertarian Mutual Aid. We run a project called the Water Project. We deliver bulk, clean, bottled water to nearly 35 locations around central and northern Rhode Island, primarily focusing on homeless encampments, meal kitchens, as well as, I'll say, at the sidewalks of a variety of cities, including yours. I'm speaking tonight, obviously, about the ordinance of the City Council, something entitled, the law entitled Public Peace, Morals, and Welfare. And this is called Offenses Against Public Peace and Decency. If there is an offense against public peace, it's this ordinance. If there's an attack on fundamental decency, it's this audience. I will ask, since my comments are, of course, are to be directed to the City Council Chair. City Council Chair, in the event of homelessness, how many beds and how many facilities are available here in Cranston for people on the street?
Mr. Ford, this is not a back and forth discussion, public comment. You have your 4
Actually,
minutes to make.
legally-
Excuse me,
allowed
Mr.
to
Ford, I'm
answer
speaking at this time. If we can be respectful of one another. It is your opportunity to be heard for 4 minutes. It is not a back and forth discussion.
Actually,
Thank you.
legally, you are able to answer the question if you so desire. I'm going to assume, based on the behavior of the city over the last few months with regard to this, and going back more than a year or two, with your, if you will, often failed attempt at, if you will, mitigating, trying to be polite here, panhandling, I have to assume that the city of Cranston has essentially declared war on the homeless. As someone who provides services on a purely voluntary, and I want to emphasize that with regard to state employment and a lot of the big not-for-profits, voluntary, it's a powerful word. I think people in the community should embrace that. And I also know that there's a variety of community agencies that are acting independently of the city. But for the city to, and if you read, if you will, the ordinance, to politely say, you know, we will evict, but at the same time message to the public that there is in fact no criminal potential, no fines, is disingenuous, again, to keep it polite. Because as we say, that's balderdash. The real and imagined potential for conflict of a physical nature when you engage with folks who find themselves homeless, as you attempt to take whatever few belongings they have and trash them, because simply they need to exist, is disgusting. We went through this a few months ago. The city council chose not to pass the ordinance. An executive order, I guess, was attempted. That didn't, well, and here we are again. If you're going to label this law, at least have the decency to call it something like Cranston doesn't want homeless people on our pure and perfect little municipal streets and sidewalks. We don't want to be confronted with the reality of a variety of complex situations, whether it be poor decision-making by the individual, which is very often not the case, or the reality of the economics here in the state of Rhode Island, as government has constantly interfered with everything from zoning to housing, and then spent millions of dollars on agencies like Crossroads who provide little or no service. There's plenty of blame to go around, but this is certainly not the solution. There's a saying in the homeless movement, just because we can't, just because you take our tent doesn't mean we can afford the rent. What's particularly galling in this time of year, Christmas, a variety of religious holidays that celebrate life and redemption, that you would choose again to engage in this. So I'm going to politely ask that this be spiked tonight, spare the community the ordeal of having to again put on display for the rest of the state and even parts of the nation their lack of morality and their lack of caring. Spike it now, kill it, and come up with real solutions as opposed to politically driven rhetoric and hate. Thank you.
Is there anyone else in chambers that wishes to be heard on any docketed matters this evening?
Hi, good evening. My name is Jessica Salter, 6 Vaughn Lane. I am here to speak on the same ordinance as the previous speaker. I am also an employee at Amos House, one of the state's largest service providers to the demographic and the people that are at the heart of this terrible ordinance. I urge you to think with compassion about how we might best approach this very real problem in the state of Rhode Island. When you're thinking about destroying these encampments and removing folks, and I read the changes in the ordinance, and I see that it does say that they need to engage with local nonprofits and service providers to see if they can be placed elsewhere before the encampment is broken up. But I can tell you that the first question that you need to ask is, are there enough shelter beds in the city of Cranston to shelter all of these individuals before you remove that encampment? And without you having to spend too much energy doing that, I can answer that for you. And the answer is no. And as the second largest city in the state of Rhode Island and the geographic center of this state, you can also ask yourself, are there enough shelter beds in the state of Rhode Island to shelter these individuals that we are intending to move? And before you spend too much time on that, I'll help you out there too. There are not. Since before the pandemic, we have had such a drastic increase in the number of unhoused individuals in this state that is mind-blowing. We have had, pre-pandemic, we had roughly about 1,000 unhoused individuals on the street at any given time. Now we have about 2,500. We all know that the number of shelter beds, the number of emergency housing situations have not increased at a level that allows us to care for these individuals. And so, good or bad, they have come up with ways to care for themselves. And I am not in any way arguing that 10 encampments are the right answer for anyone, because they are not. It is not anything we would want for any of our loved ones or ourselves. But until we can offer someone something better, we need to think long and hard about the choices that we're making to destroy property and remove people from what minor sense of safety that they might have. Right now, the state of Rhode Island uses something called the coordinated entry system, which allows people to get on a list to access shelter beds in the state of Rhode Island. So in order to access shelter, you have to call, go through an intake process, and have your level of vulnerability assessed and be added to a list with the hopes that you can access a shelter bed when it comes open. And right now, we're in such a shortage of shelter beds that the turnover is just too slow. Amos House is running the state's largest family emergency shelter. We have 57 families and about 160 children living in one single facility right now. And right now on the coordinated entry list, there are 60 families living in places not meant for human habitation. That's cars, and that are these tents that you're talking about. And not all of them live in Providence, not all of them live in Woonsocket. Many of them are Cranston residents. I know because I know many of them that live in our family emergency shelter. So I encourage you to do away with this ordinance. There are so many better ways to be helping the individuals that need this help, and none of them are a part of this ordinance. Thank you.
Drake Patton, 684 Natick Avenue. I want to acknowledge Jess Salter's comments. I have 3 items tonight, and one of them was regarding this ordinance. I think she just said it beautifully. I would only say that I've spoken on this before, and the thing that I asked you to think about is how close any of us might be to being homeless. And I think one tragedy, one unexpected thing can happen in any of our lives. I'm sure some people are exempt from that, but I would say a lot of people that we know, the people we are, it's not that safe and secure. So in the compassion that Jess Salter talked about, I think it's that self-reflection that we all need to do. And there are professionals in the state who are working in this field who I think would be great advisors. And we can do better. I know we can do better. The two other items I just wanted to briefly touch on tonight. I fully support the independent investigation of Mayor Hopkins. And I do that because it is not something that's private enough that it doesn't involve our city. People in this room are named in that suit. And that is concerning. And it becomes more concerning, item 3, when we look at the legal expenses that were put into the agenda tonight. There are 2 bills that are paying or being paid, have been paid to defend the Hopkins broccoli suit. Those are city resources. We are taxpayers. We need to know what's going on. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Jacob Kramer. I live at 416 Broadway in Providence. I'm an outreach volunteer with the House of Hope, and I'm an MSW student at Rhode Island College. So like many people, I think like most of us in this room probably, I've been aware of homelessness as a problem in our society, but I'd never really paid very much attention to it. I had kind of looked the other way. And I'm not proud of that, but that's just how it was. And then I began doing outreach work with House of Hope, and I really got to see it up close. And the situations that people are in Rhode Island are dire. People are living in places that are unfit for human habitation. They're living in tents they get flooded. They're living outside. They're exposed to the elements. They're conditions you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy. And so whatever discomfort that you feel when you see someone out there panhandling, or you see someone living in a tent, maybe they're dirty, whatever discomfort you feel in yourself, they are experiencing something that is so profoundly painful and difficult that I think it takes a lot to really observe that and try to empathize with people and not be afraid of them and not try to punish them. And these are people who are just like you and me, as the previous speaker said. Thousands and thousands of people are one little accident away from becoming homeless. They are our neighbors, they're Rhode Islanders, and rather than punishment, they deserve help. And I'd like to say a little bit just on the topic of punishment. So usually we punish people when they commit a crime, and when someone commits a crime, that means they've done something to us and we want some kind of retribution from them, right? They owe us something. And those, like a so-called criminal, will owe something to society. So I think we should do a little thought experiment about where is the crime, right? What do these people owe us as Rhode Islanders? So if someone came up to you and they had like an empty plate and they said, I'm hungry, right? Would you then take the plate from them and say, you owe me dinner, right? Or if someone came up to you and it was raining out and all they were wearing was a t-shirt and they said, I need a coat, would you go up to them and say, give me that t-shirt, you owe me a raincoat? It doesn't really make any sense when someone's living outside and they say, I need a place to live, and you say, I'm taking your tent and you owe me $100. Like, where's the crime? It doesn't make sense. It's totally reversed. And so I think this time of year, I'm also a children's book author, so I'm going to speak to some stories a little bit. There's the story of the Grinch who stole Christmas, right? That's a story where there's a little reversal, like I was saying. The Grinch goes into people's houses and he takes the presents that belong to the children, right? And so the question is the Grinch the story? Is the Grinch the hero of that story, right? Is he the good guy? And I think if we're all kind of familiar with that, not necessarily. That behavior doesn't make sense. It's not good. It's the opposite of the spirit of the season. But there's some, like good news in that story, which is, in fact, the Grinch is moved by the plight of a little girl, I believe, whose present he steals. And in fact, he changes his heart, and his heart grows 3 times. And that change actually is the heroic act. And so what I ask of you is to be like the Grinch in that regard and to change your hearts. And as the first speaker said, spike this ordinance, get rid of it, and see what we owe to those people who live outside rather than what they owe us. Thank you.
Robert Murray, 21 Garden City Drive in Cranston. Madam Council President, members of the City Council, I rise again this evening to speak in opposition and concern over the Finance Committee resolution relating to the so-called Broccoli lawsuit. As I've said many times, this is a matter in the court system, and it should be litigated there without the cloud of a so-called investigation by a partisan body of legislators. The sponsor of this resolution is a practicing attorney familiar with allegations made in court complaints. They are always framed in provocative language that is intended to put the claims in a light most favorable to the plaintiff. The allegations of this lawsuit can be easily distinguished. First is a private business matter, dispute between the mayor and Mr. Broccoli over a car and payment terms. That matter is being considered in the federal district court, and the mayor has his own personal counsel handling that. No city expenses being incurred for those issues. Then there are allegations that arise against certain city departments and a claim filed by Mr. Broccoli to this city council that you denied in July of 2023. Those claims involve certain actions taken by city departments in the normal course of their duties of inspection and enforcement for zoning and land use violations and for the protection of the public safety. Many of those allegations have been reviewed already in 3 different courts in Rhode Island. I commend for your reading the decision of Judge Michael Ford of the Cranston Municipal Court in August of 2023. As you know, Judge Ford was appointed by this city council. He decided against Mr. Broccoli and one of his business entities in his decision. While the version of this resolution on the docket tonight was amended on November 13th at the Finance Committee, this version is nonetheless suspect and unnecessary and should be defeated or tabled. Its wording leaves much to interpretation. Let the litigation unfold in court. Let there be an airing of these issues in accordance with the law and rules of evidence. This so-called independent investigation has partisan tones to it for a lawsuit that revealed itself in the middle of a contested primary contest for the office of mayor. The timing and motives are clearly questionable on the eve of a mayoral debate 2 weeks before the September primary. The primary and general election are over. The voters with full knowledge of the lawsuit and allegations re-elected the mayor. Why in the waning days of this council term are you considering a resolution that will have no force and effect in a few weeks? It's terminology of pursuing an investigation if the allegations of the plaintiff are admitted or proven. I ask, which allegations are we talking about? The complaint has already been answered in court, and some allegations are not disputed, but many have been denied. Your open-ended language seems to leave the issue of an investigation front and center. The mayor and city officials have denied claims of inappropriate use of city employees and city resources. The mayor has denied the allegations that he ever drove the vehicle in question with the city license plate 30,000 on it. Frankly, this resolution has its seeds in partisan fields, and tonight is another attempt to keep it percolating. It was condemned on its first day as a political hit, and now 12 weeks later, it remains just that. There are many questions about its origins and who knew what when they knew it. Let the matter be handled in court, and if down the road there are issues involving official conduct or duties, then let a future city council make a determination at that time. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Megan Smith. My address is 73 Babcock Street in Providence. I'm an outreach worker with the Rhode Island Street Medicine Program and a professor at Rhode Island College and a colleague of Jacob's who spoke earlier. And I was also here to speak in opposition to the original version of this ordinance, and I don't have a lot new to offer today, so I'll keep my remarks very brief. The reason I walked in late and the reason I'm dressed like this is I just came from outreach and just came from talking with folks who are staying outside, albeit tonight I was mostly in the Providence area, but the same themes that you'll hear from folks staying outside in Providence are the same as from folks staying outside in Cranston. And what really strikes me in coming from that experience and those conversations with people who are staying outside to rereading the mayor's ordinance is just the complete lack of grounding in the reality of people's lives. And just to echo points made earlier, nobody is outside because they want to be outside. Nobody is outside because they are just being oppositional to the society for the sake of it. People are outside because we as a society haven't given them what they need, what they have the right to meet their basic needs. And if, for those of us who have the privilege of having conversations with people who are staying outside every day, one of the things that will strike many people is just how wise people are. And that shouldn't be surprising, right? Because people with lived experience are always the ones who know the thing best, whether that's a culture or a situation or a city. And I was talking today explicitly with people about what do you think would make the homelessness crisis better? I'm doing some research along those lines. And people have brilliant ideas. People know what they need. And a lot of that comes back down to dignity and collaboration and partnership. And I can't help thinking about how different this conversation could be and this initiative could be if we came at it from a place of how do we engage with this community and have a real paradigm shifting conversation about how do we think about homelessness different as a society, instead of coming at it with the same worn out tropes of, you know, these are other people doing bad things, making bad choices, and we need to get rid of them. We need to invisibilize them, or we need to coerce them somehow into doing what we want them to do. And so I know I said this last time, but I think it bears repeating today, is I would really love to have a really different conversation here. And I truly believe that the people in this room can have that conversation. And I would love to be part of that. And I don't mean to speak for anyone else, but I firmly believe that a lot of the folks who are in this experience right now, who are experiencing homelessness right now, would also love to have that conversation with all of you and with all of us. So I just look forward to a different conversation than one we're having tonight. Thank you.
There being no one else in chambers that wishes to be heard, Tom, is there anyone else on Zoom?
Heidi Levine.
Hi, this is Heidi Levine, 22 West Hill Drive. I would also like to speak against the offenses against public peace and decency ordinance proposal. First, this ordinance is a cruel solution to a self-made problem. This issue is two sides of the same coin. On one side, any opportunity to build middle-class or affordable housing to help alleviate our housing crisis has been struck down and has even been called corporate welfare. And then on the other side, we punish people for being without homes. What a cruel way to treat other human beings. Homelessness in Rhode Island climbed by a staggering 35% in the last year, according to the Public's Radio. We have an immense housing shortage here in Rhode Island, which is the consequence of a significant shortfall of building homes in the state. On a specific note to this ordinance and the verbiage around it, the way this is written would have you operating under the assumption that we even have adequate social programs and resources available to alleviate this problem in the first place. The verbiage used in this ordinance states that DPW would be able to remove any such encampments after contacting and thereby having social services be offered. This is operating under the assumption that any such resources are available in the first place, which there is not enough. There are not enough beds in Cranston specifically, which is a failure on the part of the city as the second largest in the state. Until there are actually enough safe alternatives and places for people to sleep in the city, I ask you to consider reconsider the cruelty of this ordinance and the very likely unintended consequences. The ordinance would have the city remove the very few earthly possessions that these human beings have and throw them in the trash. This can mean personal identification documents, clothing, shelter, etc. I cannot emphasize enough to the council, we cannot punish our way out of this issue. We must build more housing and adopt a housing first model to address the homelessness crisis that our entire country is experiencing. We need this issue of homelessness to be approached from a proactive angle, not a reactive one. The unhoused are us. They are Americans. They are our neighbors. They are people we know, and they are people who are loved. They're someone's daughter. They're someone's child. We need to treat them as such. So I ask the council to please strike down this proposal and reserve our energy to actually help the homeless people in Cranston. Thank you.
James Brophy. James Brophy, you're in the meeting. James Brophy, you're in the meeting. They seem to be having problems. They're in.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Thank you. It wouldn't unmute. Thanks for your patience. Good evening. My name is James Brophy. I live on the east side of Cranston. I grew up here. I attended Cranston East from 2009 to 2013, and I had Kenneth Hopkins as my world history teacher in the 10th grade. I'm not here to talk about my experience as his former student, though. I'm here to talk about my experience as his constituent, specifically as his constituent who has experienced homelessness. As you've probably guessed, I'm speaking in opposition to the proposal tonight. I could say a lot about my experience of homelessness. I could tell you a great deal about the causes, the exacerbating factors. I could list facts and figures. I could spend my precious time meticulously debunking every NIMBY talking point you've already heard, doubtless more than once. Instead, I'm going to tell you about one of the most terrifying, maddening things about living in precarity. You're invisible. You cease to exist. People don't see you, or if they do, they look straight through you. You are the closest thing to a ghost that can exist, and you're not even dead yet. But of course, this world makes it very clear how eagerly it awaits that too. There is a threshold we do not speak of, but which we all know what it is. And once you're across it, there is no return trip. You are forever considered out of reach of help, of compassion, of humanity, even of touch. You are a ghost whose haunting is both involuntary and resented. This policy that Hopkins is pushing, he sells to you as an exorcism. It's not. It's social murder. Last winter, we had 54 people freeze to death on the streets of this state that we know of. Instead of more housing, we're destroying encampments. Instead of heating stations, we're throwing away people's belongings, including winter garments. Instead of trying to eradicate homelessness, we're trying to eradicate homeless people. When you tell a population, I don't care where you go, just don't come here, knowing full well the hostility that this population faces everywhere else, you're saying, I don't care if you die, just don't do it where I have to look at it. You want their deaths to be as invisible as their lives. But you're worried about needles. Needles and your children, garbage and your neighbors, refuse and our students. What about our students who leave history class and wander around the city at night because they can't go home? What about our neighbors who shiver in tents or cars? Or is it too hard to look at us? I yield my time.